In this video, we're going to explore the way different people experience spirituality within organized religions. I'm going to focus on Christianity because it's the most common organized religion in my cultural setting, and because it's the one I know the best. But I'm going to wade into the waters of other religions as well, just not as much. So let's get started. Before we get into the specifics, it might be helpful to rehash some ideas from some previous videos. Both spirituality and religion are difficult terms to define. What counts or doesn't count as a religion in popular and academic circles is actually pretty debated, with some of the more controversial examples being indigenous lifeways and worldviews such as Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Likewise, how broadly we should conceive of the concept of spirituality is debated. In a separate video on religion, I suggest that we think about the word not in terms of an absolute definition, but rather in terms of how the word functions in our day-to-day conversations within our particular culture. Thinking of religion this way, we can ask, how do lifeways we typically think of as religions, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, help their followers become more spiritual? This approach bypasses worrying about what a religion is and focuses more on different worldviews we typically recognize as religions. In an earlier video on spirituality, I suggested we think of that term in a broader sense, not limiting it to things like communicating with the divine. Instead, spirituality is about discerning meaning in life, about making and embracing connections with ourselves, with our communities, including the natural world, and with things that transcend us, such as the divine. There are different pathways people can take to achieve these goals. These include bodily pathways, for example, yoga. Pathways that emphasize the use of our brains, such as meditation or prayer. Pathways that exercise the use of our creativity, such as painting or composing music, or just appreciating a painting or a piece of music. Pathways that emphasize gaining knowledge, such as reading sacred texts. And pathways that emphasize being in communities, like communal ceremonies or being in the community of nature. Now we should note that nowadays, there seems to be a tendency in popular culture to draw a sharp line between religion and spirituality. Now of course religion and spirituality are different, but sometimes this line seems to suggest that they're almost antithetical or opposed to one another, as if religion might stymie true spirituality or keep you from becoming truly spiritual. Religion is rule-based, institutional, and communal, whereas spirituality is free-flowing, internal, and personal. Here, I'd like to suggest a different viewpoint. Because spirituality tends to deal with things like interconnectedness, religion can be a very powerful way for people to express and experience spirituality. Thinking of spirituality in a broader sense, let's take a look at some spiritual pathways religions like Christianity have to offer. First, bodily pathways. If you've been to a Catholic church before, you probably noticed that there's a lot of standing and kneeling involved. These acts actually have a purpose. They're meant to help facilitate the participants' interaction with God. They show humility, reverence, and repentance. Other churches have practices like liturgical dancing, which can include expressing belief through dance and communicating with God through dance. Another common feature of Christianity is fasting, abstaining from the needs or desires of the body for a set period of time in order to purify the body, or even to gain a better appreciation of what it is for others to be in need. Sometimes this is referred to as solidarity fasting. In other religions, bodily pathways are common. The practice of yoga in Hinduism is a great example. Followers of Buddhism often go on pilgrimages to build merit. In Judaism, the Sabbath law closely connects Jews to their bodies, not only because it's a command to rest, which obviously reminds us of our bodily existence, but also because it's a command to work with our bodies. Muslims who are able to do so fast during daylight hours for the entire month of Ramadan. These are all examples of bodily pathways in different world religions. Second, mental pathways. Prayer is a central practice in Christianity. In some ways, prayer can be a very communal practice. We'll get to that later. But it can also be strictly a mental practice, especially when someone is praying alone. There are also Christian practices of meditation. For example, someone thinking about all the things God has done in their life, or reflecting on a particular passage from the Bible. These could all be examples of mental pathways. Practices of prayer and meditation are common in religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, and Islam. One of the 5 pillars of Islam is Salat, a prayer that occurs 5 times a day. Siddhartha Gautama became the enlightened one, the Buddha, when he was meditating under a Bodhi tree. I know I'm probably not saying it right, Carl. Third, knowledge pathways. Learning about the beliefs of Christianity and studying the Bible, which of course are related, are 2 central aspects of Christianity. Christians will often read the Bible every day, and even sometimes gather together to study it in groups. Christians will also go through particular classes to better understand their religion, such as catechesis in Catholicism. There's also a strand of tradition in Christianity of learning about God through the study of the world. People who engage in the theology of nature, for instance, take the findings of science science and use them to better understand their own Christian worldview. For instance, what does the age of the universe, the development of the earth, or the biological evolution of humans mean for Christian doctrine? Learning is important in many religions. Understanding the Four Noble Truths about suffering in Buddhism is a key step on the path toward enlightenment. A deep awareness of the Vedas, the sacred texts in Hinduism, can really help people on their path toward moksha, the escape from the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In Islam, one of the key problems that humanity faces is our ignorance and our forgetfulness. According to Islam, Allah sends prophets to teach us and remind us of truth. So knowing the teachings of the prophets, especially in the Quran, is critical to living in harmony with Allah's desire for our lives. In Judaism, rabbis spend their entire lives studying the Talmud, a sacred text in Judaism that explores and expands upon the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Fourth, creative pathways. You may notice that Christian churches often have a specific architecture to them. In many cases, they are designed to help redirect human focus toward God. You may also notice paintings, statues, stained glass windows, and mosaics in many churches. These are all examples of forms of art that help facilitate a relationship between the Christian and God. In many Orthodox Christian churches, the role of the icon, which is an image that can represent something heavenly or holy, can open up a unique space for believers to have a sacred experience. Symbols such as a cross or a crucifix can also function this way in many Christian churches. Aside from visual art, if you go to a Christian church, you're also likely to hear some music. The use of music and poetry to praise and worship in a community setting is a great example of how creative pathways can be used to facilitate spiritual experiences in Christianity. And of course, we see similar things in other religions. If you go to a Hindu temple, you're very likely to see a statue or an image of the god that temple is devoted to. In Buddhism, depictions of the Buddha are actually quite frequent. While there is a prohibition against idolatry or idol worship in Judaism, the use of art is still very prevalent. Also, the use of poetry and music is extremely important, as is evident in the Book of Psalms. Certain forms of Islam have reservations about images, especially images of Muhammad, but not all do. However, there is amazing Muslim artwork using the Arabic language and calligraphy. Fifth, community pathways. At their best, religions like Christianity can create community pathways really well. When people in a Catholic church stand and kneel, they're always doing it together, as one. When Christians pray, they often do it together. In fact, when Jesus taught his disciples how to pray, teaching them the Lord's Prayer, the first two words of that prayer are, Our Father. It's a prayer that you can't pray alone. You have to pray it with others. Christians often read and study the Bible together, and they'll gather together to hear the word proclaimed in a setting of worship. Churches are a place, and really one of the few places, where people still gather and sing together. In all these cases, there's often a communal dimension to the spiritual pathways in Christianity. And again, this is true of other religions as well. In Hinduism, yoga can create a deep bond between the person doing yoga and nature. In Buddhism, there are forms of meditation meant to help the Buddhists develop compassion for all living creatures. Some of them focus specifically on developing compassion for your enemies. In Judaism, the study of the Torah and the Talmud often occurs in groups. In Islam, the Salat prayer that happens 5 times every day happens the same time every day, meaning that when you pray that prayer, even if you're by yourself, you're never praying it alone. I think one more point is worth noting about Christianity, and that is this idea about sacraments. When people hear the word sacraments, they probably think about baptism and the Lord's Supper, or communion. Depending on which version of Christianity you ascribe to, you probably think there are either 2 or 7 sacraments. But in early Christianity, there was a broader notion of sacramentality that was not limited to a particular number of sacraments. Sometimes it's referred to as the sacramentality of the world. It's the idea that the creation, the physical stuff of the world, is necessary to facilitate a relationship between human beings and God. Think of it this way. We can't have baptism without water. You can't have the Lord's Supper or communion without grain for bread. That grain has to grow in fields. Likewise, you need grapes for wine, or grape juice, depending on which denomination you're a part of. Still, it has to grow in the earth, in the dirt. It requires cycles of rain and sunshine. In this way, you can think of the apex of Christian worship, which for many is the Lord's Supper or communion, not as taking people further away from the natural world, but actually bringing them closer to it. Because you need the natural world to have that moment. You need the bread, you need the wine, so you need the earth. Therefore, you have a community of nature brought into the Christian worship service. I think that's kind of cool. In this video, we looked at ways different religions, especially Christianity, can be sources of spiritual development for their followers. This suggests that, while spirituality and religion aren't the same thing, They're not opposites either. People can be deeply spiritual without religion, but people can also be deeply spiritual through their religion. I hope you found this video helpful. Until next time.